And there was a specific question that jumped out to me like a red flag. And this person said, the March Federal Register published final rules for CMMC and another corresponding part of the Code of Federal Regulations that corresponds to SPRS assessments for cybersecurity. So their question was, what do you mean when you say we're waiting on the CMMC rule to go final? The rules are finalized. And I found this to be very odd because all I do is press F5 and update to wait to see when DoD will submit the rules to OMB to start the review process. They are certainly not published as final rules. And I said, I must be missing something. So I went to the section, and we'll have this up on screen. Our excellent producer, Dustin, will have this, sort of overlaid on the screen. I went to that part of the Code of Federal Regulations that they're talking about where the clause for CMMC is contained. And at the top left corner, it says effective date, March of 2023. And so I immediately called you and I said, Lauren, what the heck is going on? Because no rule about that section of the CFR has been issued as a final rule or even as a proposed rule recently, yet it says effective on the page. And you told me that there is a bigger universe of things happening with rulemaking and the CFR that cause that effective date to be updated, which is what we wanted to hear from you today.
So kind of where I wanted to start and, answering the question that you posed was, I always go to the CIO website as well, right? So this is DoD saying CMMC 2.0 is published. When am I going to be required to comply with it? And the first sentence here says it talks about a 5-year phase-in period. And that only can be approved by Office of the Secretary of Defense of ANS. So even though there's a 5-year phase-in period, no program is going to be required to comply unless they're individually approved by ANS. So I just wanted to pull people to this website as well. I know, Jacob, you guys have a bunch of resources, but this is also one to kind of keep an eye on. Obviously, the big yellow banner says it'll be limited during the rulemaking process. But, what I wanted to try to walk through here is how I looked at problems as a contracting officer and how I trained my staff to work through a problem, because this is kind of a different language. You can look at one piece of information in a vacuum, but you still need to pull it all the way back up and pull all the layers out of where was it sourced from and where are we now? So I just wanted to do a snapshot of that, which I think kind of got to the very specific question. And then we can roll through FAR and DFARs, if that makes sense.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
All right. So what you and I talked about, Jacob, on Friday is this top red circle, which you'll see repeated in these slides. So this is at the FAR level. And I wanted to use FAR 1.0, which is really maintenance of the FAR. So again, the idea that there is statute, right, whether it's executive order or put in the NDAA or an individual piece of law, then goes through, the CFR website, potentially goes to rulemaking, and all of this kind of falls out to, what did people like me when I was a contracting officer, what did we look at? We went to the FAR, the DFARs, and in my case, working for the Navy, the NMCARs, and they do all build on each other. So FAR 1.0 is maintenance of the FAR. And the second circle you see there is talking about the DAR Council. So the DAR Council essentially are the people that take those rules and the statute and whatever comes out from executive orders and implements them into policy and regulations for people like myself to use as we're administering contracts, putting together RFPs, that sort of thing. And now I'm moving to the DFARs. So, and the reason why I put these together in this fashion is to show you, again, this is learning a new language, right? And a lot of your listeners may never have played around with the regulations like this. But if you see, again, the FAR regulation effective date here is 3/16/2023, FAR 1.201. This next slide is DFARs, again, 201.2, which they do stack on each other. And the DFARs has an effective date of 3/22/2023. So there are two different councils, and DPC, which is, so the DAR Council is prescribed in DoD as the Defense Acquisition Regulation System. And the DAR Council is the one that's responsible for maintaining the DFARs and the PGI, which we'll get to. So who actually does that for the DoD? So if now DPC, Defense Pricing and Contracting, so this is Mr. Tenaglia who reports to ANS, they are responsible, as you can see in the first circle there, of managing the FAR and the DFARs. So this gets us to those effective dates. So the blue circle here in the middle, this is the most recent. If you go to the DPC site, and I'm sure you guys can put the link in there for your listeners.
Yeah, definitely.
They meet regularly. I think it's monthly. I couldn't find anything that actually showed the schedule, but they did have an update just last week, April 27th. And I didn't cut and paste all of them, but there's a whole list of things that the DAR Council addressed in their April meeting. Those will then be incorporated to an update to the FAR. So I show that to say these are regular. The red circle to the right is that 3/22/2023 date. And if you remember from the other slide and what we'll see, 3/22/2023 is when they essentially pushed out a new version of the FAR. So that's the effective date piece of it.
Yeah.
You can see that here. Again, these are from acquisition.gov. DFARS changes effective dates.
So they mentioned,
Sorry, go ahead.
So yeah, and so this was sort of the example, I think, when I pinged you, was if you are looking for information on CMMC and you end up in a very narrow part of the DFARS and the overall FAR, and you're only on that page, and you see what you have circled in red here in the top corner, that it's effective as of 3/22, and then you hear a bunch of people saying we're waiting for CMMC to become effective and roll out in contracts, you'd be like, what are you talking about? It was effective as of March. But what's really happening, like you said, is the larger machinery of the DAR Council and DPC and updates to the FAR and the overall set of DFARs is changing that effective date as they go through the normal pace of the machine here with updating everything. So it is not updated because the CMMC rule is final and effective. I think we all know that if that were to happen, that we would be air horns and sirens and lights, and there's a parade and a band, and there was calamity everywhere if that were to actually be true. But when I looked at it, I was like, I'm sure there's a reason why behind the scenes it says effective as of March. But to your point, it's not only another language, it's a pretty difficult language because there's no guide that says this is why this date is updated in this corner up here.
But that's exactly it, Jacob. And the reason why I kind of repeated a couple of these pages was to show that they don't change, right? So whether you're talking 2.101, which is the very beginning of the FAR, or 252, which is where we go to say, we need to incorporate these clauses into the contract, that red circle hasn't changed. But this was the other piece that you and I talked about on Friday, Jacob, that I wanted to kind of highlight here. So the red circle, again, hasn't changed. The DAR Council met. They pushed out some new some updates to the entire DFARS, effective 3/22/2023. But as you see in the blue circle at the middle, so this is 252, 204, 7012, which everybody who's listening to your podcast should be very familiar with this, right? That did have an update in January 2023. So the clause itself, what actually would go into new solicitations and new requirements is different as of January 2023. I don't know what they are. Frankly, I didn't do a side by side, but there's a difference between the effectivity date of the DFARS in totality. And then when you're looking at the 252 clauses, the effective date of the term itself. And This is different because you might have an RFP that was released in 2019, and it's going to have a different 7012 clause than an RFP that was released in February of this year.
Right. And you were saying, especially at CS2, I mean, you brought your hard copy versions, is that, as the different elements and cogs in the wheel here are being changed in independent manners, I mean, the entire FAR and DFARS catalog is being updated. The whole thing is moving along in different speeds and revisions, right?
Absolutely. And that's what having an electronic version of this, especially with the speed of, frankly, change that we're seeing, having these hyperlinks, I don't know if you can see the arrow or not, but, there's a prescription for this one. So if you go to 204/7304, which I have here, this is the prescription to tell contracting officers and contracting specialists, like my former job, when do you include these clauses? And you'll see, the 7012 is in all solicitations and contracts, including those using FAR Part 12 for commercial acquisition, unless it's a COTS. So the prescription, it has a hyperlink. If you wanted to read 204-7304 and then look at C, then it'll kind of take you there. So they do try to keep it fairly up to date. I won't say it's always as clean as it could be. Perfect example is the 7021 that we talked about. So 7012 is, and you know this, you guys both have PhDs in this more than I do. 7012 is, 800-171, incorporate that. 7021 is when that actual CMMC application, the program kind of goes live. And the prescription for that, again, 204-7503, you'll show here, this isn't a hyperlink. So I had to go find it separately. Again,
Gotcha.
Learning the system, trying to figure out it's not as simple as we would perhaps like it to be. But again, CMMC, this one was also changed in January of 2023. So the difference between the effectivity of the entire DFARS and the effectivity of a particular clause are things that you should, people need to pay attention to.
Gotcha.
So,
Yeah, I think
that. Go ahead, Jacob.
Just thinking off the top of my head, sorry to interrupt. Yeah, thinking off the top of my head, I think the January 2023 update on those, because you see it on multiple clauses, you see it on 7012, 7021. For people listening, if you end up going and you only look at 7012, 7021, 7019, 7020, remember they are part of a much larger catalog. And so the effective date, January 2023, March of 2023, will be driven probably by other things than just rulemaking around the CMMC clause.